welcome to You're Hired, Who Wants to Be an Apprentice? My name's Hilary Salt. My only job in this session is to chair. So apprenticeships have been, until recently, seen as a kind of cure to all the ills of the British economy. My kind of feel at the moment is that with many employers having to engage with the concept of apprenticeships now, because they need to do that to access the funds that they will create by their payments of the apprenticeship levy, there's perhaps a bit more discussion and scrutiny going on. So that's one of the reasons why I think this debate is timely, for us to have a bit more of a scratch of the skin of apprenticeships and see how we really feel they are working out. And we have a panel of distinguished experts to help us with that, to give us their thoughts, to set the stage for a wider discussion with you. So we're going to start from right to left, and our first speaker is Dr Ruth Mieschbuehler. I'm going to say that only once, who is the Programme Leader for Educational Studies at the College of Education at the University of Derby, but is also, importantly for this debate, the main author of the report World Class Apprenticeship Standards, Report and Recommendations. Following Ruth, we're going to hear from Dr Adam Marshal on my right, the Acting Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, and I'm sure he'll be very aware of some of the views of British companies on apprenticeships. On my left, Bally Bhogal is the Head of New Business at Pera Training Ltd, and she will be fluent in explaining all the advantages, I'm sure, of apprenticeship training. And then finally, we're going to hear from Patrick Hayes, the Director of the British Educational Suppliers Association, and who also writes very widely for educational publications. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to hand over to Ruth to start off the debate.
Good morning, everyone. Who wants to be an apprentice? Now that's an interesting question, because if you ask a Swiss person, they would say everybody. Because in Switzerland, 70% of all the school leavers are doing an apprenticeships at the age of 16, 17. If you ask the same question in England, you probably get the answer, it's a really good alternative to university, but it's not for my kids. Yeah? So what is the difference? What is the difference between the two systems? And I think it all boils down to the quality of the system, of the apprenticeships that are being delivered in the two countries. Now, what we have lost, or I think the challenges in England, is that we've lost the sense of what an apprenticeship actually is about. An apprenticeship is, of course, a contract of employment and training between the company and the apprentice, and it is about becoming an expert in your field. But what happens in England, where the minimum requirement of a length of an apprenticeship is 1 year in order to be recognized in an apprenticeship framework, is that actually almost all the training, or a lot of the training that has some kind of work-based element in it, is being called an apprenticeship. But whether that actually is, if you compare it especially to countries like Switzerland, Germany, or Austria, it isn't. It isn't. It's work-based training and an apprenticeship. There is a difference there. So an apprenticeship is about becoming a craftsman, person or woman, and becoming an expert in the field. And that takes several years to do. On average, apprenticeships in Germany, Denmark, Austria, they're 3 to 4 years in length, which is obviously the English apprenticeship of 1 year is much shorter. It's much shorter than that. So the challenge, I think, first of all, is to really understand what an apprenticeship is, and then try to act accordingly or implement the training program accordingly. The second challenge is something we see not just in further or vocational training, further education, also in higher education, is the shift towards, especially in off-the-job training, towards soft skills rather than technical skills. It's something that has come in Britain really since 1979, when the government introduced the Basis for Choice, the program. In the 70s, we have an economic crisis, lots of unemployment, not many people having a job or not jobs around. So the training wasn't no longer fixed or focused on becoming an expert or for a job, being trained for a job, but it started to focus on you, on the person. So how do we develop that person? We develop the soft skills, whether it's communication skills, team working, resilience, confidence. It's all about the person. And this is at the expense of the technical skills that are being developed. And that is something which started in 1979 with a basis for choice, but it has stayed with us really in vocational and higher education ever since. Good. So the third challenge is the duration I mentioned already. The length of an apprenticeship determines very much the amount of training somebody receives. Now, if you look, for example, at the coach or bus engineer and a training provider, or rather a trainee, big company recently told me, if you're looking at coach and bus engineering, in a year, what an apprentice might learn is how to change a wheel or how to fix a wheel. But what they really need is an engineer who can go out there if the bus breaks down and say, okay, what is the issue? And they can fix it there and then. But this takes 3 to 4 years. It cannot be done in a year. So if we're thinking of improving the quality of apprenticeships in England, they need to be longer. They need to be a lot longer than that. The last point I think I'd like to make is who is actually doing the training in the companies. There's a lot of focus on the training provider, whether it's the further education college, higher education, or private training providers. And that means the focus is on the off-the-job training, where we see the trend towards soft skills rather than technical skills. But actually, the whole point about an apprentice is to spend 80% at least of the training in the company. So we seem to forget that most of the training, a substantial part, is happening in the company. The German systems, the Danish system or the Swiss, they have recognized that. And who does the training in the company is the master or the expert in the company. And an expert or a master, as the Swiss or the Germans would call them, is somebody who has done the apprenticeship, worked for several years in the sector, then did a training on how you pass on your knowledge, and then actually starts training the person. It's very different from England, where you might have a work mentor as an apprenticeship in a workplace. So basically the point I want to make, an apprenticeship, we need to step back and say, what is it? What is it all about? It's not just about work-based training. It involves technical skills. They are acquired over several years. And we need to look at the training that is happening in the company if we are thinking of raising the quality with apprenticeships.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruth. Adam.
I was hoping that I'd have lots to disagree with in what Ruth had to say, but I actually agree with everything she said. So I'll try to add a little bit, if I may, from a perspective of business communities around the UK. I represent about 75,000 companies who collectively have 5 million employees around the country. And quite frankly, getting the right people to staff their businesses is their single biggest priority. All of them realize that their businesses are made up of people, and if they don't have good people, they are not going to succeed. And equally, a lot of them are very big investors in training and very frustrated with what they see as an incomprehensible system that changes all the time, and a system that doesn't deliver the foundation that they then require to build upon. Even so, Chambers of Commerce around the UK delivered or brokered 4,000 apprenticeships themselves last year. So in addition to being someone who is concerned about it and someone who is trying to get the system working better, we're also trying to do that from within and change it from within as well. 3 points from me just to start off the discussion from a business perspective. The first really amplifies something that Ruth said a moment ago, which is that apprenticeships need to be about quality and not about a numbers game. The worst thing that the UK government, successive UK governments have done is put big numerical targets on apprenticeships. All that's done is encouraged as many types of training as possible to be badged as apprenticeships and really cheapened the brand. Ruth talked about the duration of apprenticeships. Well, that's directly one result of what we've been seeing in this numbers game encouraged by successive governments. I'd much rather see 1.5 million or 2 million successful, high-quality apprenticeships that lead young people into long-standing careers in a company than I would to see 3 million that include 12-month apprenticeships where the individual in question often falls out of work thereafter rather than stays in it simply because it's not good enough. I have an example in my mind of a security business in Norfolk, in Kings Lynn. Everyone from the MD on down had been an apprentice over time. And talking to the MD, he said, I have 50 people in my business. The next MD will not have been an apprentice like me because the quality today simply isn't good enough for that individual to progress and get on to run this business one day. And that concerns me tremendously. So that focus on quality really has to be at the core of any agenda for change. That means more employer involvement, better information on where apprentices ultimately end up in terms of their careers, measuring where they end up and how much success they have in their careers, and more emphasis too on higher apprenticeships, those routes for people to earn and learn, and then perhaps later on go off to university and then become managers and leaders in their businesses in their own right. Second point, we're not learning the right lessons from overseas models. Everyone goes off to Germany, to Switzerland, and to Austria, and comes back and says, oh, isn't this wonderful, etc., etc. What they come back with is things like we should have 3 million apprentices. They're learning the wrong things. The simple thing that the German and Austrian model have that we don't is stability. For the last 65 to 70 years, there have been almost no changes to these systems. They were put in place in the post-war era, and they've been kept in such a way that for businesses, they're entirely legible, they're entirely clear. I have something which I call the 1, 5, 10-year rule. It takes businesses a year to hear about something, 5 years to engage with it, and then 10 years to feel comfortable with it. Unfortunately, in policy in the United Kingdom, we operate on a 1, 5, 10-month rule. We say we're going to do it, and literally less than a year later, we're already changing it. So businesses have nothing to engage with. They have nothing firm to engage with, and that makes it extraordinarily difficult for them. It also makes it extraordinarily difficult for them over time to say, I want to take a risk and invest in apprenticeships, invest in this type of higher level training in my company. Because what they say is, first of all, I don't understand it, it's not clear, it changes all the time, and if I go down this route, a big corporate's just going to come along and poach the person I've just trained because they can offer them more money. You don't have the ability to keep them in your businesses for as long as you would want. So that's the second point. The third is not something that comes from all the feedback we get from companies, but comes from the particular moment in time in which we live right now. Which is that Brexit, I think, this Brexit debate that we're all engaged in, might be an opportunity to end this deadlock. We have a productivity problem in this country that's long-standing. Part of it is down to the fact that our infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, isn't good enough. The roads, the broadband connections, the railway lines, etc., not good enough. But the second is that we are not investing enough in our people in order to get the kinds of outcomes we want to see for our economy. Now, with Brexit and the likelihood of a change to the immigration regime, we're really at a point of inflection and a point where we have to make a decision, which is, will the state partner up with businesses to do their mutual best to actually invest in an apprenticeship policy that's fit for the long term, that's legible, that's clear, that's easy for businesses and potential apprentices to engage with? And can they work together to deliver what's so often called in the apprenticeship industry parity of esteem? That we actually consider someone who's been through an apprenticeship at the same level of quality and the same level of business acumen, etc., as someone who's been through a degree program. Business and government can work together in order to do that, but there's one other constituency we need to bring in, which is the media. The BBC bias on A-level results, on university entrance, etc., pushes so many kids down that route who perhaps would be better served by a long-term, stable, great apprenticeship with a great company. So we need to end that bias as well. So 4 tests for training and apprenticeships: consistency, legibility, quality, and the right incentives for businesses. If we get those right, I think, as we go through this big transition, we'll see a much more successful programme in future. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Adam. Bally, over to you now.
Right, thank you. I'm coming at this from a sort of multi-dimensional view. I not only work in a training provider, so we deliver, as I said, apprenticeship programmes. Currently, we've got about 3,000 apprentices on roll, manufacturing-based provider, and about half of them are with Jaguar Land Rover, the other half are with small to medium-sized businesses. I'm also coming at this from an employer. We also employ apprentices, so we have our own programme internally. I've worked for a LEP, which is a local enterprise partnership, so essentially they are pushing and developing the government's agenda for apprenticeships, training and development. And also, I've worked for 2 different chambers of commerce, so I'm also coming at this from a business advisor perspective. So I kind of come at this, and it's not an easy question, it's complex, is the honest answer. And there's a lot of what's been said already that I can't disagree with either. But let me just sort of set this up. I think it probably, just if we spend a couple of minutes probably looking at an apprenticeship programme and what the component parts are. As at today, the component parts of an apprenticeship are they're a set of qualifications. So you'll do knowledge qualification, a practical-based qualification, which effectively looks at your competence in role, English and maths. And also this, Ruth alluded to it, the whole communication style, your interpersonal skills development. Put all those together and you've got an apprenticeship programme delivered at various levels, level 2 right the way through to degree level now. That's all coming in. Higher apprenticeships already been mentioned by Adam. We, in the sector, we advocate higher levels anyway. We want higher levels. We personally have quite a narrow product line, apprenticeship line, but you'll find training providers may have quite a wide and varied. I'm not entirely certain I agree with that, because I think you can end up delivering a lot of different apprenticeships and be a jack of all trades, but not necessarily an expert in all of those. However, that said, we are having to deliver the government's agenda. It's very prescriptive. In some cases, it works. In other cases, it doesn't. But there's so many different factors. There's so many different stakeholders in this. That said, the government, and I totally agree, that's always changing the policy on this. And we have to react. It's reactive. Very few times is it proactive. You've got the LEPs, the council, trying to work with employers to try to develop provision, develop new ideas to actually make this work. They want to make it work, but it's compounded by the fact that they actually want to achieve 3 million. They want the quantity, and they're sometimes quite happy, unfortunately, to put the quality to one side to get the quantity. Me, personally, don't agree with that. And I'm pretty certain there's people in our sector, individuals, colleagues in our sector that disagree with it as well. But from what I have seen, if you look at the benefits in terms of where it has worked, so if you look at in our organisation, my set of apprentices, my group of apprentices have gone on to win the national government's Braithwaite Challenge in 2015, ahead of the likes of Rolls-Royce, Virgin Media, British Airways. In other words, they were top dog in presenting, in the challenges, all the physical challenges that they did. We've seen our apprentices grow. We've seen them fly. That's what we like to see in our apprentices. We also get them to come out to events and meet other employers and go into schools and to talk about their experience. So there are benefits. We can see in them. We can see their confidence grow. For apprentices themselves, it's a job. It's a job first. And alongside it, you're doing qualifications. Yes, there's a minimum of 12 months. I think before my time, before I entered the sector, I'd heard of, program-led apprenticeships. I didn't even understand what this was, but essentially overall, it's a job first, 12 months minimum, and some of the apprenticeships can go on to be a good 4 to 5 years, depending on the actual sector. And obviously, apprentices can earn whilst they're learning. They can do their qualifications, and income. It's good for you. As far as the employer is concerned, I talk as an employer as well as speaking to employers. It's solving problems for them. Apprenticeship programs do solve problems for them, especially in resourcing. So they get an extra set of hands. Recruitment, where there's skills shortage, they think, great, let's take on apprentices. Let's put in a program here where we can actually bring new blood into the business. We'll grow them as our own. A lot of what's happening now at the minute is growing apprentices so that we have the skills base internally. And they want to be able to kind of mould and shape so that they can retain staff within the business and grow them onto a career development plan. And there's also, obviously, there's training and development that, it can help to plug that gap as well. Going forward, you have got these SFA stats that are bandied around a bit. I have to be honest, they're high 70s, 80s. Yeah, the motivations are high. Apprentices, they're so much more productive. I can't honestly tell you at what point in the programme those stats have been taken. So where is the barometer? Is it at the end of the 12 months? Is it at the end of 24 months? I couldn't tell you. I don't think any of us that operate in the sector can. However, those stats do exist. So the government's taken some measures of the impact of the programmes. Going forward, as been mentioned, there are reforms coming. The employer is going to have a lot more say, which we're really happy about, I'm happy about, in shaping programmes. And I think it should always be like that. There's going to be a bottom-up approach. So I hope that employers will get involved and look at really introducing high-quality programmes into their business. And that's going to come from April next year onwards. Net effects at the minute is, like I said, it's complex. There's so many players involved. I did a quick list of stakeholders: employers, apprentices, parents, government, training providers, universities, colleges, sector skills councils, Ofsted, awarding bodies and councils. That was just like that. And then you've got schools and careers advisors. They all have a part to play in apprenticeships, and that's the reason why it's quite complex.
Thank you very much. Right on time. Well done. Thank you. Patrick.
So I share this concern around the numbers game that the government's playing at the moment. I think the 3 million target, I'm not against ambitious targets, but I do think the target of having 3 million apprenticeships by 2020 is misconceived, partly because it serves to trivialise what an apprenticeship was historically, as Ruth has alluded to, by expanding it actually to sectors that they're actually unsuited to. I'm also concerned that they'll burden employers with additional bureaucracy and, through the apprenticeship levy on larger companies, expenditure that they can ill afford at the moment. However, one of the key things I want to touch on first is actually what's just been discussed, and that's around a dangerous trend, I think, for schools to focus ever more on preparing students for the workplace at an ever younger age. And certainly at my background at the British Educational Suppliers Association, that's something that we've been engaging in a lot of debate around recently, because I do think there's a very real danger that the obsession with preparing children for the workplace will actually water down their education and engagement with subject knowledge within schools. Ultimately, students aren't machines that need to be programmed with certain skills. That means that they can effectively transition into the workplace when they leave school. And education really is not a process of inputting these skills. The subject knowledge they acquire at school should play an important role in their development as human beings. Studying English, for example, should give pupils an insight into the human condition, not insights into how to perform certain functions in the workplace. And I think the long-standing trend to modernise education around the perceived needs of business is actually really undermining the transmission of subject knowledge to students. The obsession with boosting students' employability within schools is actually often at the expense of their intellectual development, and this is happening at an ever younger age. And I do worry particularly that even at the age of 10 or 11, students are now being shunted down a path towards technical education rather than to an engagement in subject knowledge. And I think that could be, again, to the expense of their intellectual development. At a recent event I attended by the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Education, I was really struck by an English teacher who was kind of eyes welling up with tears, who recounted her guilt at the fact that one of her pupils that she'd worked with over a 3-year period had only lasted a week during an apprenticeship scheme at a hairdresser's because they couldn't cope, and she quit. And my response to her is that she really shouldn't feel guilty about that at all. Should the pupil have left school without becoming familiar with Shakespeare or Austen, then, perhaps she should have felt guilty, but not because they couldn't cope in the workplace. I just think this is a burden that teachers shouldn't be saddled with. But I don't want to let teachers off the hook entirely. And Institute of Ideas Director Claire Fox has written recently quite substantially on the rise of what she calls Generation Snowflake. Hypersensitive students who she says has an almost belligerent sense of entitlement. And one of the reasons for this, Claire Fox argues, is that throughout their schooling, children are placed centre stage as the self-esteem movement stalks educational theory and practice. So, no wonder then, if this is happening in schools, that pupils struggle when they're immersed in the workplace for the first time, which almost by definition cannot revolve around them. The first few years at the bottom rung of the ladder at an organisation are undeniably tough, and they can often be mundane and unglamorous. And, I see this myself, having run apprenticeship schemes or internship schemes. Students who have been engaging either very regularly with teachers at school or from university with the ideas of, say, Nietzsche or Machiavelli, find it very hard to go to the bottom rung of an organisation and have to spend their day photocopying documents. But the ones that tend to get on are the ones that suck it up and realise that in doing a good job with such admin work, they're freeing up managerial time so their managers can focus on the successful running of the company instead. And they are, over time, respected for their discipline and ability to see the wood from the trees, and are often given opportunities as much as a thank you as anything else. But the ones that don't get on are those who think that such work is beneath them and think from the outset they should be attending high-level meetings, in keeping with Generation Snowflake, that their opinion is as valid as that of the CEO regarding the company. These snowflakes rapidly find themselves marginalised or out of a job and get a severe blow to their precious self-esteem as a result. I'm concerned that the focus on the government's determination to play the numbers game and expand apprenticeships is an attempt to shelter Generation Snowflake from the often harsh realities of the workplace, to develop a system that panders to the former people's sense of self-importance rather than one that actually focuses on furthering the commercial or otherwise goals of the organisation they're working for. So no wonder then that so few employers in the UK offer apprenticeships at the moment. A recent government report found that around 25% of employers in Austria offer apprenticeships, 24% in Germany and 30% in Australia. This is compared to only 15% of establishments, 1/5, that offer apprenticeships in England at the moment. When consulted on the matter, organisations say that they do not feel the programme offers exactly what's needed for industry or the size of their business. Complexities and bureaucracy are often cited by business as a turn-off when it comes to apprenticeships. And despite reforms, there are currently a massive 230 apprenticeship frameworks and over 700 pathways within them. Just to add to the pressure, Ofsted, the inspectorate, which is dreaded by schools across the country, are starting to get involved in apprenticeships as well, and have recently undertaken an audit of a number of apprenticeship schemes, and their findings have been damning. Inspectors observed, for example, apprenticeships in the food production, retail and care sectors were simply completing their apprenticeship by having existing low-level skills, such as making coffee, serving sandwiches or cleaning floors accredited. Now, you really don't need Ofsted to tell you that undertaking apprenticeships in cleaning floors is a waste of time. My final point is that the most successful apprenticeships seen by Ofsted were those in the motor vehicle, engineering and construction sectors that have historically relied on apprenticeships for their future skilled workforce. And I think in fetishising the attainment of 3 million apprenticeships, we run the risk of their rollout in sectors that don't need them. And that really undermines attempts to really generate the world-class apprenticeships that Ruth's talking about. And I would say a better target would be the expansion of the productive sectors that need skilled apprenticeships, such as construction, engineering, and motor vehicle production. We may find if we expand those sectors, then youth employment and the lack of employer take-up in apprenticeships actually starts to resolve itself.
Right, thank you. Shall we thank all those speakers? So, what I'm going to do is go out to the audience, take some comments, and then I'll come back to the panel.
Great, thanks. My name's Paul Maloney. I'm actually from an organisation, the Society of Radiographers, which is the trade union and professional body representing, funnily enough, radiographers, which for the youngsters here, by the way, is a cracking career if you're doing science A-levels. It's the point Adam made, I think, and I think you talked about parity of esteem. That's something that we are struggling with in our profession, because ours is a degree level profession. There will be those in that profession who will look at people who come through an apprenticeship route, if there is to be an apprenticeship route, as not being quite as qualified as them. But more importantly, I think, it's also parity of esteem for the profession itself. It's a profession that does operate at the highest levels of delivering healthcare and is involved in prescribing drugs, in diagnosing, as well as just taking scans. So I'm just interested in a bit more development how we do achieve that parity of esteem, because, you know, obviously as a trade union official I'd say this, but the bottom line is it's not just esteem, it's about the income that can be delivered through that profession, as well as the technical ability and skills of that profession. So I just wonder if there's anything more that could be said about how you achieve that, or is apprenticeships really not appropriate for some professions?
I think I broadly agree with a lot of what's been said today. In terms of, we're talking about incentives for business. We need the right incentives for business. I'd also ask the question, do we need the right incentives for school leavers? I think why in a world where there are so few jobs for life, and talking about expanding areas where there are more jobs for life, why in that kind of world would a school leaver want to sink 4 years into an apprenticeship and learn a lot of technical skills that they'll look at their parents, they'll look at their peers, and they'll be moving jobs every handful of years. So why would they want to do that? And those softer skills are things that are more transferable than the technical skills. I'm fully supportive of apprenticeships, but this is a question I have.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm a teacher, and I was just wanted to pick up on the point that you said apprentices are good because you should be working at those lower skills, freeing up managerial time, and that allows you to then advance. But then you said at the same time, there's no point in having an apprentice cleaning floors and making coffee. So I was just wondering, if you were a prospective apprentice looking for an apprenticeship, how might you sort of overcome that potential problem and find an apprenticeship where you can develop, but at the same time aren't going to be stuck cleaning floors? So what would you do as a prospective apprentice to try and overcome those social differences?
I also work at the same school as the person just spoken then. The chap who spoke last, there seems to be inconsistency between this idea of what an apprentice really is. On the one hand, it seemed to be slightly critical of schools and of teaching and of students as part of this generation of snowflake who don't want to do the menial tasks, and criticising the ones who don't want to be in the photocopying. But on the other hand, there's also this criticism of the ones who are doing those things as it being too menial, that is not valuable for an apprentice. And we seem to have a mixed definition, really, of what an apprentice is and what apprentices should be doing and what makes a meaningful and genuinely useful apprenticeship. Because we do need people cleaning floors. We do need people doing these really important jobs. Our establishments and institutions wouldn't survive without them. So I think we need some clarity in terms of what an apprenticeship should look like, and positivity towards the opportunities that young people can have through these mechanisms, no matter what outcome that might lead to in the end.
Okay, thank you.
So I've got one really simple question, which is, whose responsibility should it be to create or to train people up to be able to perform tasks in the workplace? So should it be the education sector or the kind of state more broadly in some way, or should it actually rest with the organisations themselves, whether that's private or public sector? I guess that kind of leads me on. I work in mental health, so in the NHS as well. One of the things that's has been quite difficult in the last few years, so a kind of typical scenario is we'll recruit into a post that doesn't require a qualification. And what will often happen is it will get flooded with applications from mental health from psychology graduates who are looking for a foothold in the NHS in mental health, because that's what they're interested in. And I guess there's a number of thoughts that occur to me from that. It feels in some ways that moving towards apprenticeships is a sort of sensible correction away from kind of pointless degrees, really, or kind of low quality degrees. And there's so much focus on psychology. It's a good example, I think. Loads of students move into psychology because they're interested in it and they're encouraged to believe that there are lots of opportunities. And they go to or get onto psychology courses that perhaps aren't the greatest, and then get their hopes crushed. Basically, they can't get jobs in that sector. And in some ways, it seems quite sensible perhaps to move down more of a kind of apprenticeship, vocational route that would give people those sorts of opportunities. So I guess my sort of related thing is that. I think the panel touched on this a bit, is that there's this sort of parallel thing where everything gets professionalised in the sense of accredited rather than any more positive sense of professionalism, where you have this a bit like the point that, I can't remember who made it now, about people getting accredited for making coffee or whatever. And that exists at quite high levels as well, actually. You have to kind of jump through a hoop and get a certificate, essentially, to allow you to kind of move on in the next stage of your career. And there aren't many there are fewer and fewer get-out clauses around that. So I think the point that Adam was making about, the kind of the CEO saying that, he's going to be the last person in the company to move through an apprenticeship route. There just seem to be really meaningless restrictions on how people can develop themselves these days through some of these sort of government organised schemes. It sort of creates barriers for people that don't really seem necessary.
I mean, just to really be clear, I entirely agree with Ofsted that actually starting to accredit cleaning the floor or making coffee is an entire, is exactly the sort of thing that apprenticeships shouldn't be dealing in. I think there is a big mistake and something has gone wrong when apprenticeships and accreditation moves into that area. I'm not trying to kind of glamorise the photocopying that happens at the lower rungs of an organisation, but it is what it is. And again, the people that get on see the wood from the trees, put their head down and do the work, and then get respect from the people within the organisation as a result of that. And usually opportunities come out of it. The people that don't get on tend to be the ones that are just kind of sulk and think that kind of works beneath them. There was one point that was made around jobs not being for life anymore, and I think that is very valid, especially when it comes to the sectors such as catering, when it comes to, for example, marketing and other creative areas as well. Churn is ridiculously fast there. Often it can be 2 years and you're into another job. So it does become very difficult to talk about a 1 year or certainly a 4-year apprenticeship when people are moving jobs so rapidly at the moment. And you can understand from the employer's point of view why they wouldn't want to invest that time and energy in training up people who would just disappear off afterwards. And you could say, well, if you give them a good apprenticeship, they won't want to go. But if it's endemic within the industry, it's very, very hard to buck that trend. The final point I just want to make at the moment is around the parity of esteem between university and apprenticeships, because I don't think this is just the issue of dealing with BBC bias and then suddenly parents and students alike will realise that the two are on a parity. I think it really is an issue of what Ruth said, really, which is focusing on making sure that we get apprenticeships that are of the quality that give people an alternative, a suitably kind of high alternative to university education. I think there is a big issue in terms of too many people going to universities at the moment, but just trying to change the media spin to suggest that the two are on a parity isn't going to work.
Thank you. I just want to go to the point regarding the cleaning and doing the sort of more mundane tasks. Okay, I have to be honest, in my experience, I've never seen that in an apprenticeship programme, and I've never had any employer say to me that these are the sorts of tasks that we want our apprentices to do. Both, I've not seen it as an employer of apprentices, nor have I seen it in any of my clients, and I've been into a number of clients. So, I would raise a question if apprentices are having to do that. That said, even as an individual working, my first job was in National Express at the headquarters, and I've made teas for colleagues, but they've reciprocated. So, there's no harm in doing that or anything, but if it's sort of part of your JD as part of your job description, I would question that. So just wanted to nip that one. There's also the question about accreditation. Somebody mentioned about accreditation, and I think government really do like this whole accreditation and certification. They want for individuals that are doing an apprenticeship to come out with certificates. They're quite obsessed with certificates, and I think somehow that's where the quality starts to go, because they start to then count the certificates, and the way that the government measure apprenticeships is less so by actually what good is it doing, what return on investment is the company getting, what are your apprentices getting. I can tell you what my apprentices are getting at work, and they can tell me because they talk to their counterparts. So they're working with us, and their colleagues and their friends have gone to university, and they come back laughing to me saying that, oh, so I spoke to so-and-so, and they're absolutely broke and they can't go out, yet here I am, and I'm earning, and our apprentice, one of my apprentices bought her own house with her partner, and she's 21. So it was examples like this. So, we have real life examples of this. So, yes, the obsession with accreditations and certificates, but I think it is at the expense of quality.
I agree with the very passionate answer that Bally just gave about accreditation and certificates. Increasingly, employers disregard qualifications almost entirely, and they look at their own aptitude tests, they look at their own intake systems, etc., in order to figure out what they think of a candidate. And that's a sad indictment of a system that A, changes too much, and B, is too obsessed with the numbers of letters and the numbers of certificates people have after their names. I think with parity of esteem, Paul's point, the very first point, I think the marketisation of higher education is a big opportunity to get there. I know you're going to disagree with me seeing your T-shirt. But when you see individuals starting to vote with their feet away from the prospect of a university degree with debt towards the prospect of gainful employment with the opportunity often to go to university later through that employment, I think you will start to see a shift in terms of levels of esteem. I think, though, part of it also depends, and to our friends in the room who are teachers, my sympathies for you with all of the burdens that you face and all of the diktats that you face. But we need teachers helping us as well in terms of moving towards parity of esteem. When teachers actually get extra credit in their schools for helping push pupils towards the sixth form attached to the secondary school, rather than possibly towards an apprenticeship program, and push kids towards the university route, because that's the way the incentive systems work, that's not right. That's got to stop. So changing those incentives in the way that they work is going to be hugely important as well. Just finally on the low skill point, those who are saying that things are being accredited that perhaps shouldn't be accredited. Part of this is about taking the brand of apprenticeships and pulling it back up to the kind of level that Ruth was talking about, the 4 years you spend with a master before you go out there into the world. I really disagreed with the notion from the individual in the green shirt at the front that you're getting an overly specific technical education if you go down that route. I don't think that's the case. I think you learn teamwork, you learn how to work with colleagues, you learn how to problem solve. You get so many transferable skills in addition to those technical skills if you spend a long time in an apprenticeship. The way it gets undermined is if you have an apprenticeship that's 12 months and you do the photocopying and the team making and then you get a qualification for it. That's what's not going to work.
Just to reiterate that point on the soft skills, it's not the soft skills. Although they're transferable, or rather we refer to them as transferable, it's not the soft skills that give you the job. It's the technical skills. If you are an expert in an area, whether it's a butcher or a designer or an electrical engineer, that's what gives you the job, not the soft skills in terms of transferability. There's also this idea about employers need to be sure somehow that the apprentice, after they finish the training, they stay there. That's why they're doing it. And I think that's an inherent problem in the English system, and it's down to the numbers, really, because that's not what it should be. An apprentice that's being trained in a company shouldn't necessarily have to stay in the company. It has to in England, because there are only 500,000 apprentices, and basically, if the apprentice finishes the training and moves on, it's a loss for the company. Totally agree with that. But in Switzerland, for example, where so many people are doing an apprenticeship, what happens is the apprentices are moving on, but there is also another apprentice waiting outside the door to take up that job. So you see what I mean? It's at the moment the low numbers that are actually forcing the companies to think like, oh, I want to keep that person in that job because I need, there's nobody else coming up. Well, if we had more numbers, then that would solve the problem itself, I think. So that's a number issue there. The point, Adam, you were making about we need to invest in people in order to increase or improve the outcome for the economy, I think it's wrong. It's not investment in the people that brings about industrial growth. It's really the capital investment or the investment in technology that encourages industrial growth. Yes, we need the people, but once the industry is growing, then the people will come along anyway. So I think really if we're talking about economic growth, it's not, the education will bring about growth argument doesn't work. It is really about investing into the economy there. And just to very short point about education and the obsession with the accreditation. Adam was mentioning the case that at the moment we have too many certificates and the employers actually don't know what they all mean, so they do all their assessment centers, and that's why, that's what they're looking into, because they're not sure what the qualifications of the students are all about. The point really there is, and that comes from my research from the employers, they want people, when they start an apprenticeship, they want young people who have a good level of education. i.e. Philip Toner, an expert from Australia, said on apprenticeship that it's a problem when kids can't do maths and they can't write. Why? Because they come into the company and basically the company is investing time, money, resources for the young person to catch up on knowledge they should have had when they actually started the job. And that, of course, slows down innovation and economic development within the company. So good education, the kind, Patrick, you were talking about, is what we really need for a high-quality apprenticeship.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the audience again.
So I'm a second year history student, and I find it kind of interesting how you talk about loads of people going into university and like stuff like that, like all the quality people are going to like university and not taking an apprenticeship, and that kind of made me think, oh, is it just because university, the image of going to university is just so much better than in apprenticeships? I feel like in university you've got this culture of like freshers week, meeting friends for life. I mean, maybe not financially independently, but you're living independently in a new place. This just seems so appealing almost for people considering their next options. When they say compare it to apprenticeships, they might have this impression that, oh, I will just be cleaning, floors or, doing like menial tasks. And that kind of like pushed me forward maybe of just going to history. I know loads of other people as well, like taking schools as well. It just feels better prestige-wise for the school, for these career people, to encourage them to go into universities, Russell Group universities which have high standards, are recognisable by parents and stuff like that. You never felt like there was this encouragement, especially by my career as teacher, to ever even consider doing an apprenticeship. So I just feel like it's this image problem of apprenticeships not being good and universities being better, when perhaps necessarily, there should be more debate on it for a person.
Yeah, I speak about the Swiss experience because, although I'm British, I live in Switzerland. And I worked in an aviation company recently, and they employ more apprentices every year than they actually need. And the apprentices who pass compete among themselves for the few jobs that are available at the end of the process. The rest are sent on their way. They have a professional qualification which they can take to another aviation company. And the company then selects the ones that it wants, and it hopes that it gets the best of them and the ones who really want to work there. And part of the strength of the Swiss system, I think, is that it concentrates on those areas which are of high value at the top of the value chain. So Switzerland is very successful, for instance, in making the tools that make machines, the precision instruments that design the machines that you use in manufacturing. And that is a very high-end skill to have. You don't need a university degree for it, particularly, but you do need to be highly, highly qualified and highly respected. And it's not something you can learn on the job, ad hoc, just from experience. And that gives the whole economy an edge that the other economies find it very difficult to compete with. And in Britain, I have to agree, the guy on the end there, that just randomly you've got to really target your apprenticeships to make them of the value that people respect it. Because in Switzerland, it is highly respected, and it is an equal decision to make between university or apprenticeship. The kids are at the same level when they make that decision, because very often an employer right at the end of the process will prefer somebody with 3 years of experience at the age of 22 to a 22-year-old coming out of university who doesn't even know how to use a photocopier.
Following on from the idea of prestige and image, a lot of schools, especially my own, they push students who aren't doing as well into apprenticeships, but those students who are doing better, so if you're an A-star A student, you're going to get pushed to go down the route of university, despite the fact that the job that you want to go into may not require a university degree. But how can you remedy that situation if so many different schools are going to sit there and tell their students, if you're doing well and achieving high grades, you should go down the university route because it'll be better suited for you, despite the fact that your career choice may not need a degree.
I think Ruth's comment when she came back was really helpful in terms of the sort of economic side of things. It does feel a bit like there's almost a government belief that you can train or upskill your way out of kind of economic difficulties. And to me, that just seems completely the wrong way around. I guess part of my question about whose responsibility is it to kind of get people skilled up to do the jobs that need to be done, I think my answer would be it needs to be more the employer's responsibility. I mean, yes, there can be some connections between educational institutions of different sorts, but if we had a thriving, productive economy, then those organisations would also create their own schemes, and to an extent, that's what happens anyway. So the kind of people have talked already about the the sort of historical connection between sort of manufacturing and sort of various sort of car manufacturers were mentioned as having run successful apprenticeship schemes in the past. And it doesn't seem a coincidence that the kind of countries that have been mentioned that have a sort of successful record with apprenticeships are also those countries with successful manufacturing economies, which ours isn't at the moment. I guess the only other thing is whether there's a sort of a class thing in here as well. So I'm half Dutch, and my cousin in Holland, you get kind of moves at quite a young age actually in Holland down at either an academic or a vocational route, and he wasn't particularly great academically and quite quickly went down a vocational route, and he's now a very successful heating engineer. And that it doesn't seem to matter in Holland particularly, because there's not that sort of I guess it relates a bit to the point that was made behind me about the sort of the status of university versus sort of more vocational routes. Whether that's part of the problem in this country as well.
Okay, thank you.
I previously worked at my last school as a sixth form tutor as well as being a teacher, and our training was all entirely devoted to UCAS forms and filling in UCAS forms. And every week I would speak to my tutees, 20-odd students, and we'd go through the process of filling in their UCAS forms. And then every so often there'd be a little talk for them to go to apprenticeships, and 4 children would scurry away and go to apprenticeship talks, and in return they'd be forced to go through a UCAS process. So I absolutely sympathise with what people are saying with regard to schools and forcing them down this route of UCAS. And to my mind, that was entirely unjustified. There were students who ended up leaving sixth form halfway through to find good apprenticeships. And there was one student in particular, she found a fantastic apprenticeship. And it was immediately as if the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders, because she'd been going through a year of difficulty trying to access these A-level courses, which to her, this didn't suit her, her aptitude, her skill, and she was so relieved to have found this apprenticeship. And I've tried, in my own small way, to contribute and measure to this conversation about getting students to be more engaged with apprenticeships. But there is a fundamental issue in schools, and we need to, I feel, have more input from businesses and have more input from outside agencies within the schools, and to actually open the doors to these things, because schools are becoming quite closed off. We might have 1 or 2 careers advisors who will offer some advice in that direction, but they're still pushed with the school agenda, and that does need to change fundamentally.
Okay, so we're back to our panel now.
Just on the point of the careers advisors and giving more advice about apprenticeships, actually doesn't work, because we have very few apprenticeships in England. So if you tell the entire nation you should be doing an apprenticeship, they're really great. Well, they don't exist. We don't have them. So that's one of the problems. In terms of the who should be responsible for it, really, I mean, I totally agree it's the employers, because what I came to the conclusion to with my report is, in order to have world-class apprenticeships, we need world-class employers. And I'm not saying it has to be a big company. It can be a small company, it can be a big company. The thing is, as a company, you will need an innovative product that sells, and then you're world-class, I think. So the responsibility is absolutely with the employer, but at the moment, the control isn't. That's not where it is. The control is with the government, and the control is mostly with the training providers, whether it's further education, higher education, or private providers. Why? Because it's a business. It's a business. Developing opportunities is just a business at the moment.
Okay.
And it does need to go to employers.
Thank you. Adam.
Okay, I don't completely agree with that. The responsibility is shared. Employers spend £50 billion a year training people. I think we're already doing a lot. We can always do more, and our leadership skills need to get better. Our management skills need to get better in the business sector. But it's a shared responsibility. The product that comes out of the education and training system also has to be good, so that employers want to invest more. On to the links between business and education, and my sympathies to the school student and the university student here, who have had no real talks about apprenticeships and no real encouragement to go down that route. 2 ideas that could help. Let's get teachers out into businesses for a week or 2 every year, into local businesses in their areas. And of course, let's get more businesses, as you were saying, into schools. I've got thousands of businesses banging on the doors of schools and head teachers saying, we don't have time for you, we can't work with you. I know you guys on the front line don't want that. You want those businesses in. Let's solve that problem.
Great, thank you very much. Bally.
Oh, where to start with all this? You know, there's so many things mentioned. Image of university, I think, yeah, you know, there is definitely a draw and attraction to university. Kids these days, students want to go there. Universities, apprenticeships don't seem as glamorous. But yeah, there's a massive image and there's massive information just isn't getting out there. And I think we've got a big job to do with regards to image. Ruth also mentioned about control with training providers. We might have control, but to be honest, we've got a noose around our neck. We're also having to deliver what the government wants us to deliver. It's not always what we want to do or how we want to do it. It's very prescriptive. So I quite like the idea of these whole new, our what we call the frameworks are being replaced by standards. These standards now for apprenticeships are being developed supposedly by employers. Mind you, there's a bit of that's a bit contentious as well with employers. So I'd like to think that that's going to change, and it's going to be the employers that are actually going to be in control in controlling the seat.
Thank you.
Going forward.
Patrick.
Listen, I think there really is an issue of universities in this country where students are now going to get jobs rather than to engage in knowledge with their own sake. And I think far too many students are going to universities as a result to get a return on investment and to further their career. And I think we need to reclaim the idea of the academy as a place to engage with ideas, not to further your career path. I entirely agree with this point around kind of Switzerland, but I think it is telling actually in terms of apprenticeships in the UK, most of them are in the service sector rather than in the productive sector. And I think rather than interfering in apprenticeships, I think what the government could productively do at the moment is invest in more infrastructure and invest in making the productive sector more valuable within the UK and a larger proportion of the UK's overall revenue. As Ruth said, really, it's not education that's going to bring about growth. It's very much going to be the investment in those productive industries. And I would hope as those productive industries grow, then the issue with getting people to sign up to apprenticeships and the issue in terms of the jobs being higher value will resolve themselves.
Thank you.